I grew up on the Navajo reservation. My connection is to Mother Earth. I can hear my mother's heartbeat. I can feel when she's cold. I can feel when she's warm. I feel the light when it comes up to the east. I feel the warmth. I feel the sun throughout the day. I feel the sand on my feet. I feel the wind on my skin. I understand the seasons that are coming. This is who I am. I'm connected to my mother. We're all connected to our Mother Earth. Today, we are dealing with climate change. Our mother is telling us. As you see in the news, there's many places in the United States where the temperatures are hitting over 100 degrees. Our mother's telling us something that we need to make a change. When your mother tells you something, do you make that change? And this is serious. Indigenous people across the world understand these values. When mother's upset, she roars with thunder and lightning, tornadoes and earthquakes. We listen to Mother Earth. We have a connection to our land. The connection is not just to our Mother Earth, but our mother through our umbilical cord. We have a connection to the light. We have a connection to the land. We whisper. We whisper to the east. We greet the east in the morning. Our prayers are not monetary things. They're about giving us water, giving us food, giving us life to breathe. They're not monetary things. We also look at our family. Our family is our home and it's key. Life is about family. So our connection is around us. As we plant our feet, as we get up in the morning, and you think about how Indigenous design existed, it was all about designing with the elements, understanding the lay of the land, acknowledging where the land came from. The two-legged, the four-legged beings. We have to be respectful as we start moving towards, having a better place. The word is 7-generation thinking. 3 generations before, 3 generations after us. We got to think about that as you young students pursue licensure. You guys have an impact. Have an impact to be able to listen. My people, the Dene, the Navajo live here. You see the little map there, on the Navajo reservation. We were forced by our government onto these reservations. They took our family, they took our history, they took our culture, and they placed us in these boundaries. There are 574 recognized tribes across the United States. My tribe alone has over 400 enrolled tribal members. I am from a proudly tight Coalition community, and it is without outside cultural influences at a young age. I told my dad that I wanted to be a football player. He said, "You can't be a football player." So as I transitioned to school off the reservation, I was presented with a career day. And what I found upon me was a gentleman dressed in a black suit, white t-shirt, colorful tie. a roll of drawings in his arm, and a model on the table. He said, "I'm an architect." So I learned what an architect was at a young age. As I went home, I was thinking, I told myself, you know what? If I can't be a football player, that's what I'll be. I'll be an architect. I went home and I told my dad, and I said I wanted to be an architect. And he says, "I don't want you to be an architect." My family, my community, the expectations of me were to go into sociology, to come back and help my people. So the notion of me giving up my two dreams, a football player and an architect, was crushing. As I ventured off to college, I went to school at the University of New Mexico. I took sociology classes, but it wasn't something that I was just passionate about. I kept walking over to the architecture school, and I looked at those models and the drawings, and I told myself, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be an architect. So I graduated with a master's degree in architecture. My dad didn't even know I was going to school for architecture. He came to my graduation. And he looked at me and he said, "You did it." And so I was like, yeah, this is what I want to be as an architect. So the idea about this football, I still have football in my mind, right? Football being a team and collaborative sport, right? Kind of designing and building with a collective purpose. That's what we do, right? Moving that ball down the field, so to speak, for the betterment of all. What I encountered through my profession was a room full of men. But they didn't see me as part of the team. They see me on the sidelines, not on the field, getting their version of their Gatorade, which was coffee. I was the water boy, Bobby Boucher. Through my practice, I would get performance reviews. And those performance reviews would be, "You're not a team player." I started growing tired of this treatment, so I gave them an ultimatum. The bid also would say, "You walk around this place like you own this place." Told myself, well, I kind of limp, right? Kind of a tomboy, so how does one walk around this place like they own this place? So I gave them the ultimatum. I said, "Play me, coach, or I'm out of here." So what I did was I started my own team. I took my football and I started my own team. So the journey that I took, which is really interesting, it was really the men who inspired me to choose my dreams as a football player and as an architect. But it was also the men who failed to see the dream they were promoting. So, bringing the game to my Indigenous people and designing with purpose, outside the nation as well. Reaching out and reaching back, I wrote my own playbook. All which is to design and promote those who are in spaces carrying their own footballs, seeking greater purpose through design. So I ask you guys this question. What is your football? Do you have one? Field your own team to play and win the game by your own rules. So that's what I did, was I created a team that I was seeking all along, and you can too. We have over 574 recognized tribes in the United States. Much where your probably colleges that you're going to school at probably have a little bit of history. This is my culture and this is where I'm from. So understanding and learning from your past is most valuable in order for us to move forward. In 2012, I started my own firm called Indigenous Design Studio Plus Architecture. Our vision is connecting culture, language, and tradition through design. Something was quite unique. And the reason why is because as I was a student, I used to incorporate Indigenous design ideas, this Indigenous worldview about connecting to the land. Researching and understanding the language and the history and culture. But my instructors would say I'd make these things up. That how did you come up with this stuff, right? But no, this is all around us. So my firm, Indigenous Design Studio Plus Architecture, is about connecting language and culture through design. I have a team of 10 people at my office, and we've grown from working out of my home, laying out drawings, working on proposals on the electric stove, running a USB drive in through the garage to print our proposals. Now we own an office. So part of our vision and our mission is also about educating, advocating for involvement for the community. Indigenally, this is how we used to design. We call it a participatory planning process. It's about listening to these stories. As you listen to these stories, you'll be able to come up with concepts. We don't come and bring a design to you and say this is what you should live in or what you should work in. Also teaching. It's important that we continue to advocate about Indigenous design in our school books. I guarantee that most of you in your architecture career probably had at least 4 pages of Indigenous design. But we can learn a lot from Indigenous design. So we need to also promote individuals like myself, educating people about Indigenous design and the Indigenous worldview. So how do we do this? It's all about learning from the past, right? We have a culture. We've got our traditions, our people, and our language. Those are really key foundations of really understanding who people are and where they live. If you don't follow these, you end up coming with architecture that are shaped like turtles, that are shaped like teepees. So what we do is we come with a planning principle diagram. So you gotta understand the history, you gotta understand the language, the tradition, the culture, the art. So this planning principle is about the Navajo culture. And if you don't know much about the Navajo culture, typically the structures are facing east. You have a male hogan and you got a female hogan. But there's a lot of meaning behind entering the door through the east. We enter clockwise. The men sit on one side, the women sit on the other side. You have a head of honor space. Every direction has a sense of connection to the Indigenous worldview. We also make sure we understand that the different seasons, climate. So this is a planning principle that you could use, and you could do this for any type of Indigenous architecture, so that you're able to talk the language and have a sense of who they are. We can learn about many Indigenous architecture around the country. As you see this map, we've got the Great Basin, the Plateau, Great Plains, Beach and Woodlands in the southeast. So what does that tell? We learn about thermal massing in architecture school, right? These are some of the first buildings that have ever had thermal massing, right? Talking about passive heating and cooling, nomadic housing, right? I remember a couple years ago, the word work live loft, right? But some of the indigenous people have built these live work loft. There are also some of the cities, the first urban cities, the first urban fabric that still exists today. You look at Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon, very instrumental about how they designed and planned with the sun, the earth. Understanding the culture and their traditions. I always hear the word, oh, let's go have a powwow. But do everyone know what a powwow is? So understanding the uniqueness of the culture and the people are important. Indigenous design, the most important thing is more of a democratic design. Many women in indigenous communities were the first architects. It was the men that would actually get instructed to build these structures. The women listened and they planned. So part of that is part of the participatory planning process. It's about listening, and when I'm saying listening, it's not about an agenda and we have 5 minutes to talk. It's about listening to those stories. And those stories can take some time, that notion of time. With those stories, you can come up with sketches that relate to really the culture and connecting also these modern technologies. The emergence, we indigenous people have emergent stories, the connection to the earth and the sky, the orientation, to the sun, to maximize the sun during the winter months. Looking at the breezeways outside during the prevailing winds. How we can optimize the solar, how we can look at wind. It's with those stories we come up with our concepts. Concepts through, our designs that shape our built environment today. And it's about architecture, it's about culture, and it's also about community. So all those things intertwine together. So you see this diagram. Typically in an architecture office, you will see the typical team, right? You've got the design team on one side, and you have the client on that side. That's typically how projects are done, and how you're also being taught in architecture school. But indigenously, you see at the bottom here, there's the idea of keeping people informed through the design process, not just at the beginning or at the end. It's throughout the whole life cycle of the building, throughout the life cycle of the community, integrating them as part of the decision-making process, not just the designers, the engineers, but it's about also the elders and the youth. Thinking about the idea of the 7th generation thinking. So it's important that we continue to educate people about this process. It's a little bit longer, but educating them about the importance of listening to the stories and listening to the people. And also getting people engaged. When people are engaged, they're speaking. When they're not, they're sitting. That we don't want to just do things as quickly as possible, right? If we design quick, right, we're going to be running into issues that we're trying to solve today. Making sure that the community is aware, about this time sensitivity, and educate people about the design process. I talked about, if you don't follow these typical rules of understanding and coming up with design principles, you end up coming with these these are horrific, who's gonna see this turtle? I'm a bird or I'm in a plane, right? Or, understanding that, a teepee, yeah, you understand a teepee, but you can't just be putting teepees all over the place. So educating ourselves about this, because we gotta move away from this type of architecture. So indigenous design principles is all about also integrating contemporary materials and technology. So at IDSA and through my practice, we start to be able to understand and research materiality. Because so many times we have been given schools and housing that are been designed by the federal government and saying that we gotta live in these schools, we gotta live in these homes and live in these structures. So here's an example of some of the things that we have done. This is on the Navajo Nation. It's a 38-acre site that we planned. We followed the process of the participatory planning process. And it took about 6 months to do this. I think in a typical project world, it'd probably be shortened in between, 6 weeks to 8 weeks. So the 38-acre site was gonna be a brand new campus for a new school. So some of the design concepts that came about on this project was there used to be a canyon, and that canyon used to disperse water to the community. They would like to see that. We're actually in a watershed right now. So what we try to do is we try to look at the land, and we try to make sure that, where the water was gonna be falling and draining down the hill, there's a hill up towards the west, that we actually also start thinking about how that is connected to architecture, right? The water. Sometimes in a lot of urban cities, we don't see that. We just take it to a place where it can just drain, but we want to retain this. So the campus had a lot of amenities that you guys see here at your school. And this is a brand new campus at the Navajo Nation, which is Navajo Technical University. They actually offer AutoCAD and Revit at the school. And once they learn, they can go off onto other, other colleges. But it's important that, these schools are being connected to. So you see the number 1, we designed the 20,000 square foot facility for this building. And this is the final outcome, of the building. It was a 20,000 square foot building. How we incorporate indigenous design was we wanted to orientate the building towards the east. We also looked at the connection between the emergence story from the earth to the sky, looking at the solar optimization and looking at the views. The views to the space was out, they're amazing. And looking at how the sun path started to go around the building and throughout the day. So really the building skin is really a smart building. Some of the ideas that we talked about early on, we're trying to integrate the architecture that really influenced the landscaping in the surrounding areas. The connection to the sky, looking at different type of materiality, part of our research. How can we do this? They get a lot of wind. They got a lot of wind. How can we minimize the dust? And here are some of the few pictures. The only lonely building on the site. a classroom, a 20,000 square foot classroom, but the need was actually probably around 80,000 square foot. This building is being used for multiple meetings, spaces throughout the community. These are the things that we need to start looking at and advocating for. Multi-use spaces. Here's another project. This is a 40,000 square foot building. And the idea of inspiration really comes from the locals of the art. The exterior facade was really resembling a loom, a Navajo loom, on the exterior facade that can create pattern. And this idea of indigenous design is that you have to do multiple spaces. You have to do spaces that you can be used not just for one type of occupancy, but several types. Multi-use spaces. And this idea of art looming patterns throughout the different types on Navajo, different rugs, the meaning behind the different rugs. Keynote, known for a lot of their landscaping, a lot of the Western movies come from here. A multi-purpose. The building that existed today was only like 1,500 square feet, but the need was a lot larger. This one, the Shiprock Judicial Center, people usually call it, justice centers. But the traditional name for this justice center was actually trying to integrate the police, the judicial aspect of it, peacemaking, into a building where they actually work together. So this was a 115,000 square foot facility building where we actually worked with all the components of the officers, the corrections, also the courts and the law enforcement to come up with the building. And kind of these modern ways, of a building to be put together. And this is just a short video of kind of the walkthrough of the exterior facade. This is specifically for Navajo, but you don't see, hogans that are kind of really, attached to a rectangular bank building. How the Navajos would dispute if there was anything in the community and there was maybe wrongdoing by an individual, they would use peacemaking, a peacemaker, before they would even take it to the next level. So the peacemaker would actually help them and talk to them throughout the process so that they can come to a consensus. So the peacemaking was really about, the justice, the traditional justice. So that's just a few, and what I want to leave you guys with today is that no matter what you guys do, I think you have to be really intentional about what you do. And be proud of who you are and where you come from. That was taken away from me, but starting my own firm, it was really instrumental for me to talk about the importance of Indigenous design and architecture. That it's just not a building, but there's so many meaning behind it. And really trying to educate people about this Indigenous worldview. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from Indigenous architecture that we are having conversations about. Climate change, right? We have to start looking at some of these examples that have existed many, many years. And really listen, and I always say, listening to, Mother Earth, because she is saying something, and we need to make that change, and it's gonna be up to you, future architects, to make that change and advocate for that. So thank you.
so much, Tamarah, for your incredible work. You inspired all of us to be more conscious designers and taught us so much about how Indigenous values can enrich architecture and planning. I also just want to say that one of my favorite parts about architecture is that everything should always have a purpose, and I think you've taken that to the next level and a much more meaningful and purposeful level. So thank you.
How many questions do you think we can take? There's gonna give 3 questions. Okay, we're gonna take 3 audience questions. Please raise your hand. There's a couple of mics walking around. Raise your hands high, please, so our people, those who got one right here in the back row. And can you also please say your name and your school as well when you ask your question?
My name is Penelope. I'm from Ohio State, and I'm just curious how language influences your practice.
A lot of our language, how that's included, we traditionally, like for my own culture, Navajo, we do all the presentations in Navajo. And I think that's important because architecture does really no language, in a lot of like Indigenous cultures. But it's about those stories and how you implement it. You kind of think of it like the code talkers, right? They had different names for different things. And so it's nice to go back and speak to that. And I feel like people are more sincere when you're talking in your own language, and people respect that a little bit more. A lot of the schools that we are designing are actually doing schools that are immersion programs. So once you get into those doors, it's all about, that Indigenous language that is being spoken. So we have to include that as part of the design, and how the language is spoken. And it's not just about, putting signs up with the language, but it's understanding like how they teach them about their culture. So having that unique way and having to understand that is really important.
Hi, I'm Paulina Garza. I'm from Monterrey, Mexico. And I'm starting like my own firm as well. So what would be one advice you could give like to all of us that have this as well?
Yeah, my advice, if you are inspired to start your own firm, like don't be afraid not to do it. Because I had so many people tell me it's a lot of hard work and that you couldn't do it, but it just made me try a lot harder. I think that if you have that motivation to say that I want to start your own firm, you'll succeed. I mean, you have that heart and you're speaking about it, you're getting it out there, into the universe, you'll do it. I would say don't be afraid.
All right, last question, hands high. Right here.
Can you hear me? Okay. So when you were starting your firm and putting yourself out there, how did you find like a community to serve? Like, how do you know like where Indigenous communities like that are in need of like new development and new buildings and how to develop their community? Like, how did they find you? And like, how did you put yourself out there?
When I left my previous firm, I had a client that was doing some planning work for like 75 different communities on the Navajo Nation. And I quit and I had one more exam to pass. So what I did was I started and I named my firm Indigenous Design Studio because I couldn't add the architecture because a lot of licensures won't let you add that. So I started out with Indigenous Design Studio, doing planning work, not architecture, but I always tell them planning work. And eventually, like people started to hear about, our process, like our unique process. It wasn't just straightforward of like, okay, you have to design a building, you need to get this done. I think people were really interested in, having a commitment to, what they're building and designing and having it be true to like their culture and their history. So I think just getting out there and marketing us, it was kind of like a word by mouth, right? And so now, we have been really grateful now that we've been asked by different cities, across the United States, to implement Indigenous planning within their urban fabric. For instance, like the most recent is in Ohio. I know some of you guys came from Ohio, but we're gonna be going out there and we're gonna be trying to implement some of that stuff into the city planning aspect, as well as like Cleveland. And those are things where I think they feel it's important, about Indigenous architecture and how we could reclaim the land, which was taken from a lot of these Indigenous cultures. So it was really about, the word of mouth and, people understanding what we do. And now a lot of non-Indigenous firms, big firms, we've been asked by Gensler, we've been asked by HKS, to do some of their work and collaborate with them as part of, the design process and how to include this participatory planning process. We tell them it's a little bit different. It's like we have to kind of unlearn architecture and go back to learning about Indigenous architecture and how we can implement that into our practice. And I think architecturally trained, it's a little bit harder because it's like schedules, we have to do different phases, but the general public are more like in tune to this more Indigenous way, this Indigenous worldview process.
I think that was our last audience question, so can we please give one more huge round of applause?